A very warm welcome to Lecture 4, where today we're going to consider the marketing environment, including a global context for our brand. We're also going to look at how do we add customer value and this idea of a customer value proposition. And we're going to conclude by looking at branding because that plays a huge role in terms of customer value. So, as I mentioned, we're going to open today with considering global marketing and the considerations that we have to have in place if we're going to operate over multiple geographies. We're then going to look at a framework or two frameworks to evaluate the marketing environment externally. We're going to start considering customer value from the point of view of what adds value in terms of the customer relationship and how do brands build that in. We're going to specifically then focus on branding and branding as a key strategy to develop a point of difference with our customers. And we're going to conclude by looking at a framework where we can identify the different products or different markets which our companies under consideration might serve in order to assess whether they need to move or then move their positioning in terms of what they're offering if they've got any gaps in their portfolio. So it's quite a comprehensive session today where we're introduced to a number of different frameworks and theories. So to start off with, when we're considering operating globally, that's going to require some really key strategic decisions for any organisation because we've got to consider how our different countries that we're operating in vary. So what are their cultures like? Do they use different languages? Do they have different processes in terms of the sales process and in terms of how they engage with products and services? And there's so many other challenges that we've got to consider. With digital technology, we can put out very similar messages and adapt them more easily. So it's allowed businesses to expand digitally very easily in terms of serving the markets. However, in terms of creating the right rapport in those markets, that's a different matter. So that requires some more careful consideration. If we even think about the context of having a cup of tea or consuming tea, in certain countries, tea is consumed in a pot. In other countries, it's consumed in a cup. Tea is drunk at different times. In some countries, it's drunk with milk. In other countries, not. All these different variables, they're going to change the product itself, but the imagery on the product, have we got a cup with milk in it? Have we got a pot instead, a teapot? Have we got, so it's a very, very complex way of, it's not a complex way, it's a very, presents a complex set of challenges because the more we try and create a rapport with our customers, the more we must understand their terms, how they engage with our products and services, and to create a backdrop to our brand where they think that we get them, we understand what they want and need. So some of the key considerations include culture, so consideration of that. How much do we need to use language and adapt our language in terms of our marketing communications? And even how are they going to pay for the products and services and what mechanisms are in place, particularly if we're considering over a digital landscape. So in terms of the cultural differences, what we need to consider if if the brand you are looking at, the company you're looking at, are selling digitally, how are their responses to buying online? So is using the web a way to promote our services and goods? Or is it something where they'll actually quite comfortably, if they've got a high level of trust in terms of online purchases? So we need to focus on how we're going to make that happen. We've got to focus on understanding the processes and if there's any key resistance. Is there a lot of cybercrime? Do people have the mechanisms to pay online? Do people even have access to the internet freely? So we need to adapt our digital strategy to the country that we're operating in. Do we then need to signpost people to a retailer to buy offline? So what's the role of the online sort of part of the journey? So we need to be very considerate of that depending on the different culture which we're working with. And we also need to understand how many people have smartphones, tablets, laptops, how many people are connected, because that is going to change, and the speed of their connection, the availability in terms of accessing more complex material, so sort of video footage. Are we able to use that, or do we need to develop it in another way that's more accessible to them? So broadband speeds, and we can analyse all this through the data that we're finding about those specific countries. We also need to consider how is their lifestyle. So in terms of how many people work, what sort of hours do they work, are they going to be commuting, and actually whilst they're commuting to work, if a lot of people commute into cities, do they use their smartphones? Will they be using apps then to do online shopping? There was some research that was done in terms of shopping habits pre-Christmas a couple of years ago in the UK, and the peak shopping period was at commuting times when people were on trains and buses and using their digital devices to do their online Christmas shopping. So that would have implications in terms of ensuring that our online mechanisms are really robust for a huge volume of traffic, but also in terms of our infrastructure to be able to supply those goods and services, but our support as well, making sure that we're available when people want to shop with us. So we need to ensure as well that we're using the right digital media in terms of social media to engage with our brand, to engage with our target audiences globally. So actually, if we've got different social media platforms in different countries, are certain ones more restricted? So are certain ones banned in certain countries? So we need to really understand the engagement and the profile, so the target customers for different social media, and build those in line with our target customers so we understand the way in which we should engage with them, the most direct routes to our target customers. Now, in terms of adapting our language, that sounds very obvious. We change our language for the countries that we're operating in. However, what companies have got is this, they've almost got this sort of dilemma. The more that they adapt, the more expensive it is to produce their marketing communications. So the more standardised we can be, the better. So a company that have done this well, and I think are a good example, are Coca-Cola. So in terms of their television advertising, what they do is they create an advert that could be in any country. So it's very generic. The landscape is generic for it, the background, even the people in it aren't specifically, you can't see that looks like they're of a certain nationality. So they ensure it's as neutral as possible. In addition to this, as a backdrop, they use music. So instead of language, they're putting music there. So there's no spoken word. And so it's music with a certain, so it's very Western actually, Westernized, because that's seen as a global culture. They then also instill a key message which is unified across the globe. So the key messages for Coca-Cola are about happiness and sharing. So they tend to be about someone sharing or building a bond with someone over a Coca-Cola. They do other advertising campaigns where there's more language involved, but what they try and do is in their advertising, they capture emotion more than word. And by doing that, the adaptations for different countries are minimalised. So that's a very smart approach in terms of doing that. So companies who are looking at trading globally need to ensure not just that they change the language, but also in some countries, people's level of literacy is quite low. So actually, if they are using language or written elements to their communications, they need to ensure that they adapt that if they're operating in a country where actually people can't read to the same level, and they're trying to reach that target audience. So therefore, companies have got a number of different options when it comes to considering trading globally. They could decide just to avoid that country. They're not going to trade in there. They could have a separate brand. So PepsiCo operates a number of crisp brands. They own a number. They own Walkers in the UK. They own Lay's in America. They own Smiths in Australia, and they've got a number of other ones. Actually, they're all owned by the same country. However, the branding, the flavouring, the packaging is all specific to that country. And the reason being, there's quite a high with food products. You've got your Western, your sort of KFC, your McDonald's, Subway, that are all perceived as Western brands, so they're seen as global brands. However, there are other types of products, such as crisps, where they're very much tailored to the local palate, the flavours, the sort of the variations on it. So therefore, they've retained their local brands in terms of creating a high level of trust in those countries. So that's an example of separate brands just for that country. And that they have also changed the brand names entirely in those countries. So you would see on there that it's part of the PepsiCo family. Somewhere on that branding that will be in there, but it'll be very subtle because actually the key impression is about resonating with that country and them recognising the brand. And they then invest in terms of managing those brand relations in that country. So an example of that, in the UK, we have Galaxy Chocolates. That's been a well-established brand. But in other countries such as China, the same brand is known as Dove. And actually, chocolate is an interesting example of a brand where the formula for the part of the product is very different in different countries. So the sweetness, the amount of milk that's in there, and that's why perhaps if you're British and you go to America and you have Hershey Kisses, which is a very well-known brand of chocolate in America and very well liked. The English palate, which is used to, say, Cadbury's chocolate, doesn't like the same formula, so actually doesn't enjoy that type of chocolate. And when Cadbury's were taken over by Mondelez, which I believe is part of the Dove, part of the Kraft group of sort of the corporate group, which owns a number of brands, when they tried changing some of the ingredients in their products, so they made a Cadbury's cream egg and it was then created with a different type of chocolate, it wasn't very well received in the UK. So basically, you need to be really careful when you're changing things where a brand has got a certain level of reputation in a country and a certain level of trust. So in digital marketing, we've actually got more options when it comes to changing the language, or not more options, they're more easily executed because the cost of print, the cost of production doesn't exist. It's much smaller to create the same advert backdrop, but just have different language on there. But we've also got to be very mindful that the call to action, so what we're asking them to do next, works for different countries. So actually it's strong enough. So if it's for the UK, it might be about buy now, and you've got a number of mechanisms to do that. If it were adapted for a Japanese market, it might be inquire at your local agent. So there they build trust in a face-to-face selling process. So we need to just ensure that it's a very tailored approach to each country to maximise the results. And then we need to consider how payment happens in that country. So actually, are people using their phones and their watches to pay? Are they using PayPal? Are there other mechanisms? Is it more of a cash-based economy? It's quite interesting, the statistics about in the US, gift cards are very, very popular as a mechanism for paying. Understanding this, using the data to understand the way in which the transactions take place, is really important in terms of creating effective calls to action that are going to lead to the right financial results for our organisations. So we've just considered on a broad sort of level some of the thoughts that a company who is trading globally will have to think about, so some of their considerations. Now, in assignment 2, we are looking at, for your particular organisation, and you could consider this in assignment 1 as well, a context. So what's going on in the environment in which they're operating in? And we've got different factors, and they're going to influence the ways that they communicate, but also they're going to influence the date. So they're going to, from these different factors, absorb and process and capture a wide array of data to inform their marketing strategies. So we've got what's going on in the marketplace. So what do the consumers want? What are the competitors doing? And we're going to what media messages do we need to put out there? So we're looking at what's going on where we're operating. Internally, what's driving our organisation? So, what's their strategy? What's the internal culture as well as the external culture with our consumers? Um, what resources has the company got available? Because actually, that will hinder or that will give them access to different marketing approaches. And then, socially, politically, what's going on within the organisation as well? So, what's going on behind the scenes? Why do they want to drive things in a particular way? Are they looking to buy to float on the stock exchange, in which case they're looking to up their level of sales, for example? And then externally, we're going to look at this in more depth. What sort of factors do we need to consider to have a really good level of market knowledge, of external knowledge of what's going on in the market to inform the strategy that we're going to take, even in defining our target customer groups? So sort of building on what I just mentioned about external, there's a framework called PESTLE which we can use. So PESTLE has a structured way of capturing the data that we need to look at what's really impacting the marketplace, and actually as an organisation, how are they going to respond to this? So the best way of using this is where you've got a series of facts and figures that you've collated from some really credible sources. And that's the sort of approach that we're asking you to take in this module. Otherwise, it can be used on a very general point of view, and we've just got some ideas in our mind about what we think's going on, but actually we need to make them specific and we need to interpret the evidence in light of our organisations under consideration. So let's look at some of the things that can be included in a PESTLE analysis. So political tends to be what the government is doing. So this will change over different countries. So what's their tax policy? How are they charging corporation tax, for example? So how are they taxing companies? Because that will mean it's more or less attractive to trade in a particular geography. It's connected with this, even though we've got a separate environmental element, how are they policing environmental concerns? So, an example here in the UK, in the automotive market, the government is really intervening to make sure there's an agenda that pushes electric vehicles away from diesel and petrol vehicles, and they've got certain quotas in place. So the car manufacturers based in the UK or that are trading in the UK will need to be selling a certain proportion of their cars that are electric by a specific point in time. If not, they will be fined. So there is a push mechanism there towards an environmental agenda. So it means that Jaguar Land Rover, who traditionally sold on ego, so in other words, they sold to people's perception of looking good, seeming successful, were then moving to eco. So actually the drivers then are more about environmental consciousness. But of course, to their target customers, it's still about looking good. Trade restrictions. So actually, are we making it hard to do business with a certain country, or harder or easier? What sort of agreements are in place? What reforms are happening? Are there tariffs they're introducing? So with Brexit in the UK, they're adding tariffs to wines coming in from different countries, meaning it's going to be less attractive for some wine manufacturers to trade with the UK, and it's going to put the prices up for British customers, which ultimately is going to make the wines less attractive. Another key consideration for attractiveness to operate in different countries is the level of political stability. So actually, if you've got a country with a lot of political unrest, a company might find it very difficult to trade in that country because they're concerned about any efforts that they make, any money that they earn in that country. Is it going to be disrupted? Is it going to be better to wait till there's more certainty in that country to really create a strong presence in there and really invest in doing business in that country? So political, very much government driven and very much country by country. Economic, there tend to be different trends in different regions of the world. So there's going to be decline or growth in different regions, which means that's why it's quite helpful to have a global market, because we can actually look at balancing the risk. So where certain countries are declining in terms of the disposable income, in terms of jobs, in terms of sort of economic prosperity, in terms of gross domestic product, other countries will be booming, or at least not doing as badly. That's the hope. But of course, sometimes there are world recessions. Interest rates within countries, or within, yeah, they do tend to be across certain countries within the banks and lending institutions. It will make it more or less attractive to borrow money. And what that results in is ensuring that our organisations have access to resource, because actually if they can't borrow money attractively, they're not going to be able to expand their marketing activities. Considerations of exchange rates will make the impact on our pricing. Inflation, so actually that builds in this level of uncertainty as well. If there are high rates of inflation, it can make our products much less attractive. How much are people earning? Are there minimum wages? What sort of hours are people working? And are people working at all? Is there unemployment? And their cost of living. So all of these sort of factors are really important in terms of disposable income. However, people aren't just going to buy products if they've got high levels of disposable income. What we can do as brands, our response in terms of our decision making. I'll give you an example with Coca-Cola, not Coca-Cola, McDonald's. So McDonald's have what they call a pound saver menu in the UK. So they put certain items are just £1. So things like burgers, chips, etc. So they've got a set menu that they have. This works exceptionally well when the economy is quite depressed, and actually means they take business off other fast food retailers, because we can work within a budget. So what I'm trying to put across here is, just because the economy isn't particularly good doesn't mean your products or services, or the organisation's products and services you're looking at, become unattractive. What it means is you may have to change their position. You may have to look at how your target market is operating. And then the final sort of key factor on economic is looking at the availability of borrowing, because people don't necessarily they need to have the means to buy what you do. They don't necessarily need the money directly there and then. They need to have access to it. And that can mean that you can sell quite expensive products and services actually, yet people haven't got the money to buy them there and then, but because they've got a want for them, that they'll go ahead and agree to credit terms. So an example of this in the UK, we can buy sofas, settees, that sort of thing, furniture, on 3 years interest-free credit. So in other words, this tends to work very well near Christmas for the retailers. So when it's coming up to November time, it's winter months, we're spending a lot of time indoors, and we're thinking, oh, we're going to have a nice family Christmas, we're going to have people around, our settee needs replacing, but we haven't got the money at the moment. So we can buy it interest free over 3 years. We can have it in time for Christmas. So there's the stimulus. We're using a lot of time indoors. Our family can benefit from it, and we will continue to pay it off over 3 years. Sociological. Massive time of shift throughout the pandemic, so a really interesting time in terms of the increase in people's values and in terms of considering what's important to them. So actually there's different expectations on the companies we're doing business with now. We want to make sure that we are doing business with organisations that we like and trust. So actually, that's one demonstration of how we're actually choosing differently. So our consideration set, the organisations we're considering buying from, are changing. There are always changes in terms of our attitude towards health and fitness, and that creates new market opportunities, and actually a reduction in certain products we're having to change because of that. In terms of the population, how that's growing, the growth is slowing, where there are peaks in certain ages, that might change the way that you market what you do, or change the way in which you sell to, actually the benefits for certain ages may be different. Are your sort of potential customers very ambitious? Do they believe that family becomes before work? What are the expectations there in career attitudes? And then another consideration, certain countries are far, far more interested on a sort of individual level in terms of health and safety than others. Others are more blasé and actually are less aware of the risks that they're taking. The higher the scrutiny of health and safety, the bigger the cost to the organisation in order to comply and actually use it as a point of difference that they've gone through certain levels of scrutiny before they release their products and services. So it might be for baby related products because people have an even more sort of a higher level of concern around products to do with their children, that you really make the most of all the health and safety checks that you've undertaken. So you put their mind at rest and they're far, far more relaxed about working with you and buying your brand. So technology, obviously huge levels of technological innovation all the time, and that is going to present new market opportunities, particularly for digital offerings or digital means in terms of getting them to the customers. But say even things like 3D printing. So actually we can buy things now and print them off at home, our ornaments, so actual products we could do that with. But also obviously there's artificial intelligence, so we can be looking at products from IKEA and we can use our phone to see how they would look in certain rooms if we were to place them in our home. That sort of thing is very accessible and has been in place for a number of years, so we've got to consider in terms of the innovations there and keeping pace. Legal, this will really impact in terms of certain industries have a lot more have a much higher level of legal scrutiny than others. So certain areas like the financial services in the UK is regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority, and they will put levels of protection in place. So a lot of legal is to do with protecting customers, but it can be also about protecting the economy. So we're also making sure that we're limiting the number of exports to protect our domestic economy. So legal, it gives an opportunity really and makes higher barriers to entry for companies wanting to operate in particular fields. And then environmental, this is driven by consumers and the government. So there is an agenda in terms of sustainability, and actually that isn't just limited with the organisation selling, it also extends to all their suppliers and how they do things. So the whole sort of consideration of the market environment works really well with Porter's five forces because we've got a really good understanding of the landscape in which we're operating. So we're going to be considering, or you're going to be looking at in week 6, specialist databases that will help you understand the marketing landscape in which your organisations are operating. So Porter's five forces is a way of scanning and looking at the market power within a particular industry. So you'll look at the industries in which the two companies for assessment 1 and 2 are operating in. And ultimately it was designed to see how attractive is it to go into a particular industry. So let's have a look at each element of the Porter's five forces. So what we're looking at is competitive threats. So first of all, are people going to be using different products or services? And we've got a fantastic example here of people using smartphones or tablets or tablets in particular instead of laptops because they are mini computers. So actually, if we're looking at a substitute, what we need to consider is how expensive is it to move to something else? How are they priced? So actually, is a tablet less expensive than a laptop? In which case, it's going to be more attractive, especially if we only need it for a limited function. We need to look at the quality, both in terms of the product, but their performance as well, to ensure if the better the quality of our substitute, the more likely people are to switch to it. So you're not just looking at direct competition, you're looking at what else is on the market. Another thing to consider is actually how attractive is your market to new entrants. When I spoke about legal, I was really considering there the barriers to entry. So actually, if we've got a huge dominant digital brands can come in quite easily into our market space because they're already trusted and known. So the likes of Google, Amazon and eBay were able to enter the market and they ramped up over time. But if they entered the sector that we're in, the chances are we'd be at threat because they've already got economies of scale. However, the more barriers we've got, so if you think about pharmaceuticals, the patents that they've got protecting certain drugs, legal, the regulations in place, the higher those barriers, the less attractive it is for other organisations to enter. If we're thinking about a product that's very simple to make, something like a wax melt, the barriers to entry are very low. Today, I could set up a business that sells wax melts and I could set up a website and accept e-commerce payments, and therefore the barriers are very low. Economies of scale. So we've got companies like Amazon have got huge economies of scale in terms of they're able to sell things quickly, efficiently. They've got everything in place and inexpensively to the consumer. So there's some ideas in terms of the threats of new entrants. Inside the market, what's going on there? Who are your competition? How are they interacting with you, with each other? And actually, are they stuck in the marketplace because it's so hard to leave? And what I mean by that, they might have factories set up for producing specific goods or products, in which case closing the factory down would be an expensive process. Getting rid of staff would have a huge reputational cost. Um, if the market's quite slow in terms of growing, the only way you're going to get more customers, because you can't acquire more customers to develop the market in a traditional way by marketing, is to buy your competition and to buy their customer base. But again, that's going to be less attractive if your market's shrinking. So just think about what's going on directly in your marketplace. And then your suppliers, are you stuck? Are you limited to a limited number of suppliers? Are there only a few? In which case, you're really tied in. Is it expensive to move to another supplier? Can your supplier do more for you in terms of some of the distribution potentially? And then buyers. So our end customers, what do they want? Who's actually buying it? Are they retailers? Are they individuals? How tied in with us? Are they on contracts? Are they able to move quickly? In which case, the more they can shift and the faster they can shift, the less loyal they can be to us, which puts a significant level of threat around what we're doing. So we've looked at our marketplace. We've looked externally, we've used a pestle to gather a lot of evidence, hopefully, and use that in a logical way to assess our market threats and opportunities. So that ties in with SWOT. We've then looked at Porter's five forces in terms of assessing the power within our organisation. So let's now consider our customers and what adds value to them. We need customers. If we haven't got customers and we haven't got consumers, we haven't got a business. What we need to bear in mind is customers will make decisions based on rational things, but also emotional. So we need to create a connection on both levels with them. We've got internal customers within our organisation, and we've also got the external customers that generate the income for our business. And also within that process, our external customers, we've got those that buy the products, and then we've got those that consume it, and then those that influence the choice. So we've got a lot of stakeholders involved in this process. And actually, one way in which we can really invest in creating a reputation that's top of mind is about considering how we use our brand. And we're going to look at that later in this lecture. So, how do we create customer value? And there are three groupings of suggestions from the work of Buttle and Macklin, as referenced here. Okay, so we've got operational excellence, the likes of Amazon, the likes of eBay, huge infrastructures in place. They do things so efficiently and then they pass it on to us. And actually, organisations like Aldi, the low cost supermarket chain, they also invest quite a lot in getting things done as slickly as possible. And the reason being, the more efficiently, the more they can operate a value position. So they're lean, they're focused, and actually it's all about sort of providing us with convenience. So that's one way in which they can add value. Another way is offering the best products available. So arguably, Apple do this in terms of perception anyway. So they're continually innovating, and I have a feeling, whether it's true or not, that if I buy an Apple product, I'm buying the best. Yeah, as I say, it might not be true, but it's about perception. So it's about emotion as well as reality and rational thinking. And then the final way they can create value is about customer intimacy. So it's about knowing and understanding what I need, the emotions at that time. I've recently changed my surname. Okay, so you might have a bit of a confusing messages about whether I'm a Price or a Quirk. And my name is now Hannah Quirk. Now, in order to do that, I changed my name via deed poll. And I used a service called Name Switch. And this service allowed me to go through and identify all the different mechanisms with which I interact. So things like I've got a passport, I have a driving license, the companies which I have bills with, my council tax, my banks, the companies that I own. And it went through and it grouped all of these together. So I didn't even have to think about, I just went through a checklist. I added in my customer account numbers for these. And what it did was it generated a series of letters for me. It created my deed polls, copies of that I needed for the legal transaction and the instructions that I needed to do there. So it captured that as an agent of deed poll. It also then created a series of instructions that I need to follow to change my name with everywhere that I need to change my name with. And it produced letters for me, so instructions and letters. So all I needed to do then was follow these instructions once I've got my signed deed polls and then issue them to various places. Now, that was an automated service, okay. However, I was so delighted by that service because I've never known anything like it. It's a stressful process, there's a lot to remember, it's easy to forget things, and yet they created a sense of customer intimacy by understanding my fear around it and then creating something that matched that fear that was tailored just to me. So I think that was an excellent example of customer intimacy, and they did that at a price point of which it was about £90, and I just thought this is phenomenal. It's saved me hours and hours of research, and it's taken significant pain away from me. So that's a really good example of a brand creating customer intimacy. So I'd like to go back at this stage to the lecture which I delivered last week, because another way in which we can create a customer value is through the exchange process, and it's about understanding, just as I've explained with you, the exchange which took place. So for my name change documentation, the company provided me with it took away, ultimately the exchange was, it took away the fear, the hassle, and all the research, and it saved me tremendous time as well as giving me reassurance. In exchange, I supplied them with quite a bit of information, and that took quite a bit of time, but I also paid them a set fee. And they actually presented me with physical evidence, a beautifully packaged envelope with everything that I needed. And I have to say, for that, I think they priced it wrongly because of the pain that I suffered for it. I would have suffered by not using them. I would have paid a lot more. So we understand there the value comes through that exchange process. What am I getting and what am I investing? And actually, if I'm not investing enough, I'm not likely to value it enough in terms of the exchange. So please recap on when you're looking at value at the exchange process. So we've started off by looking at global and how we operate globally. We've looked at the external marketplace. We've then moved on to considering how companies add value. And I think it's really important now to consider the role of brands because they're significant in adding value. So what I'd like us to do now is to consider what are brands to start off with. So let's have a look, because Steve Jobs said that marketing is about values, and actually brands is about conveying those values. So let's watch this short introduction on what brands are. Okay, so let's moving back to the slides. I think that's a really good overview in terms of the psychological benefits of brands. And we're considering brands have massive value to the organisations, which, well, all organisations, because they're about a perception. They are setting a goal, the expectations, unique elements, memories, stories. They're about conveying what you're going to expect from this brand because it's set in terms of the stories and characteristics. So it allows you to do something, as Godin says, preferably at a premium price, because if we manage these expectations and set these stories, then we can do that. So the fundamental idea with a brand is about it gives a standard, but also it gives recognition as well. So it's about everything which is produced. So we understand, and as you said, as the video said, if we hoover it, if we Skype our family, we're starting to then own the category in which we operate. So it's a really key financial asset actually for an organisation. It helps us as consumers because we understand where it's coming from, the brand. We have knowledge of that brand already, even its reputation, which reduces risk, means we can buy quickly, and we have a relationship already. It's symbolic. So actually, if I'm buying something as a gift, I'm likely to buy a more premium brand than if I'm buying something for myself. So in terms of our context of usage, it helps us to signpost where we're going to go. And it's a signal of how good it's going to be. So it's important because with a brand, we're more likely to try something from a brand that we know and like. So Cocoa Pops, I think it was Cocoa Pop, no, it was Frosties. They had a different sort of variety of a cereal anyway in the US that was launched. And because the cereal was known, the trial was actually, they got 0.5% of the entire cereal market. I remembered which one it was. It was Cheerios. And Cheerios introduced a frosted version. They got 0.5% of the US market in doing that with no advertising. The reason being, people know and like Cheerios. They knew what to expect. So we know with your brands that you're looking at, they're going to be organisations that people know and trust. Because of that, they're more likely, if they do something new, for people to try them, as long as the perception of fit works. So as long as it's something which it makes sense that they're doing that. This then encourages word of mouth, or electronic word of mouth even, which then stimulates a level of loyalty as well. If we like it, we try it, we use it, we're likely to use it again, which means all that cost in acquiring the products is going to be much cheaper to keep a client or keep a customer once we've invested that in our marketing communications. So brands are phenomenally important because they're about the DNA of that organisation. So they're at the core of the organisation. They're a set of values and promises. Back to what Steve Jobs said about brands, it's about values. It's actually, we need to make sure as well that we always deliver. And it's interesting because brands with a strong reputation, so really credible brands, even if they mess up a little bit and introduce some products that don't work, they're still more likely for people to keep trying them again and to not give up on them. So even brands like Starbucks, which have had certain issues with their tax payments, they've had a little bit of negative publicity, they haven't reduced. People still carried on working with them. They still like the brand. They have a little bit more forgiveness for brands that they're invested in. It helps us understand where do we sit in the market. So in terms of our perceptual fit or that positioning map, we know that if we buy a Jaguar Land Rover, that it's going to be in a certain luxury position and a certain price point. And that all comes from the reputation it has and the trust we have with the brand. So it's really, really important because it gives an idea of where the organisation sits and where it could go. So their strategy for an organisation must be aligned with where the brand's going. It incorporates, not the missing, the mission and the vision of the organisation, and it's all about what they stand for. So it comes across through the colouring, through the design, through every touch point that we have. So it's a combination of both the visual identity and the sort of the experience that we have. Um, Brands have also a level of personality. It's like dealing with a person because we're that strongly linked in terms of our decision making with our brands. It is like choosing who we're going to be friends with. And we've got to make sure that that brand is consistent in terms of their values across all their different media. Now, that is a challenge because if you consider different media targeted to different audiences, so there needs to be some commonality in their values. So let's go back to Coca-Cola again, sharing and happiness. If that's their core values, they can adapt that on Instagram. They can do it for a younger audience on different platforms, and then they can do it for an older audience on more traditional platforms such as TV. So if they've got strong enough core values, they can represent them slightly differently without going off brand, just to resonate with the different audiences that they've got. We have something in a brand that's called equity. And the equity is about the value in that brand. And that value comes from people being aware so they know the brand in the first place. And there's an education piece on doing that when it comes to communications. They either know it, once they know it, they can either recognise it, and recognition comes when we're at the supermarket, we can see a variety of different options, and we think, oh yes, I remember, I wanted to get Heinz baked beans. Okay, so we don't see till we look at, we've got Branston, we've got Tesco's own brands, and we've got Heinz. I've heard Heinz are really good, so I'm going to go for Heinz. Recall is stronger than that. Recall is where we write our shopping list and we write Heinz baked beans. We don't even consider any of the alternatives because we think baked beans, we think Heinz. So what brands want to do, they want to get to recall. They want to own the category. They don't want you to think cola, they want you to think Coca-Cola. So actually, in terms of brand awareness, it's about a memorization process. It's about teaching people and so that they learn. If you think about their sector, their category, you think about them. And what it means is it's more likely then that people, when they have a series of options, they're more likely to be motivated and choose your brand. And actually, it's really important because we need to then confirm every time they experience consuming your brand, they develop even further knowledge about it. And actually, they have the association because it becomes a behaviour. They don't even think twice. They've invested in the outset in terms of deciding which brand to go for when they choose their beverage of choice. But now they know they will seek you out. So that's really important. And actually, if you satisfy what they like, so we think Starbucks, if I go in there, I have a good experience every time, the product I buy is always delicious, then it confirms and confirms that you're satisfying my needs and wants. And in terms of the brand associations, it's more and more favourable to me. But actually, the more different that you can make yourself as well, that really works. So actually, if you've got a brand that operates in a marketplace, but it has sustainability at the core of their values. So for example, if I'm thinking cosmetic products or beauty products, and I buy from Lush, because Lush is about sustainability, they don't actually pay for any marketing. They do it all through their communications. They do it all through creating fabulous products, and they put their marketing budget into their products. So even packaging, they try to leave off if they can. That's quite a unique selling proposition when I compare that with, say, Boots as a whole, and Boots' own brands. So actually, that uniqueness means that I will pay more for those products actually, because I'm getting more value in terms of the products I feel are a better quality because they're investing in the product rather than the marketing. So that gives them a competitive advantage in my mind anyway, which is important in the consumer's perspective. So when we need to think about what brands stand for, you need to consider who is it that you're trying to appeal to. So let's go back: segmentation, targeting and positioning. What are the characteristics of those people that we want to do business with? Once we've got them in mind, we're working out what fits in terms of our brand's personality. Brands have personalities just like humans, and there's been some research by someone. There was a father and daughter, David and Jennifer Aker, and they did a tremendous amount of research on brand personality, and they came up with 5 dimensions of brand personality, and they measured them across a series of countries to see have brands got similar personalities across countries. And they have, but there are some adaptations because in certain countries, certain personality dimensions don't work, they don't fit, they don't resonate with that country's culture. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the options in terms of developing a brand personality. So this was created, this is more sort of UK based, okay, in terms of the personality. So in Japan, for example, you wouldn't have rugged, you'd have peaceful instead. Okay, so we've got 5 potential personality characteristics, and and our brands tend to have a couple of those that are using together and combined. So actually, if we're the BBC or CNN, we want to be seen as a competent brand because what we do is we provide information very well. We're reliable, we're intelligent, we're successful. For a luxury brand, we'll major on sophistication. So if we're L'Oreal, a beauty brand, if we are Tiffany's, the jewellery brand, we will go for a sophisticated dimension. Ruggedness, as I say, is a very much a UK based dimension. So rugged is about masculinity, it's about almost a level of aggressiveness. So that works. There's a chocolate bar in the UK called Yorkie, and it's a very masculine, even the packaging, very blue, very striking. And it's meant to be a sort of, it positions itself as a rugged brand, and it's not for girls. Other brands that are rugged in the UK are outdoors brands for outdoor goods. So, like North Face would be quite a rugged brand because it's seen as very robust. It's high performance. It's so those are the sorts of things that are attributed to it. A sincere brand would be a brand like Johnson's. So Johnson's do a lot of work with baby products, and we want a brand we can trust with a high level of trust there. Exciting brands. An exciting brand is actually Pepsi Max position themselves as exciting. So they're trying to be a bit more exciting than Coca-Cola. So actually, what you'll see is organisations that are in a sector where actually there's not very much different in the product differentiate themselves through their brand. And water brands do this. So Evian, Live Life, Live Young is their strapline. They try and position themselves with all their imagery of baby as a sincere brand. Whereas another brand in the sector, Smart Water, might be a competent brand because they've done a lot of research on the sort of nutrition that needs to go, the minerals and things that need to go into their water. We'll have other water brands where they're positioned as exciting or as sophisticated. So Evian would be more sophisticated, higher price point, but actually we've got all the benefits of the natural sort of the coming from the mountains, and actually the beautiful branding as well. So it's more of a sophisticated brand. So when you're considering your organisations, you're looking at how do they act? Are they formal, informal? How would they describe themselves? And we're really looking at them as humans. What's important to them? Is it about the country they come from? Is that part of the story? So Evian, it would be about the country it comes from to help them deliver a more sophisticated brand. So branding is absolutely fascinating. It's about a visual element that conveys colour, trust through their visual elements, but it's also about their performance and how they deliver. And how innovative are they? Are they always trying to be the best in the business? Does that mean, or the best in their sector? Does that mean they're more of an exciting brand because they'll deliver the latest innovation to us? And we can see this through a number of different ways. We can see it through what they call themselves, their names, their domain name. In the UK, we have a brand called B&Q, which is for work at home, and their demand, so it's for sort of paints, ladders, things like that. Their brand URL is diy.com, do it yourself. That's what it stands for. Very effective. Okay, the tone of voice. So as I say, Pepsi Max, an exciting brand, is about being a little bit naughty, a little bit mischievous. Their logos and symbols. So Diet Coke aimed at women, and that is a silver can with red italic font, Coca-Cola font, obviously. Pepsi Max, also a low-calorie drink, aimed more at a masculine market. Therefore, their colouring is more black with a contrast of red and blue. So it's sort of very different in terms of the look and feel. The packaging or lack of packaging, when we came to Lush, that will tell us about what the brand stands for. And slogans and jingles are very effective in terms of repeating the messages. So McDonald's, loving it, and that little tune that they've got that goes along that was created by Justin Timberlake. And they spent a significant amount of money because that's about repetition, it's about learning. So actually, when we come to our brand elements, these things, we want to make sure people remember them, that they've got a positive attitude and like them, that if possible, we can use them in different categories. So Dove in the UK is about beauty products. And Dove have extended from women's products to men's products, and they've just entered the children's the children's, I wouldn't say beauty because then that's the wrong word for children's, but hair care, bath products. So they've extended because they're known for being genuine, for being sincere, and also competent. Adaptability, Google. All the time we see little things that are bringing new dimensions to Google's sort of story because they're showing they're of the moment, they're adapting in terms of providing the latest information. And how transferable is it over different geographies, or do we need to change elements? So do different names have different meanings in different countries? Dove and Galaxy, so chocolate brand, but different because in the UK, if you had a chocolate brand called Dove, we'd think now about the beauty products, it wouldn't work, so we need to retain Galaxy. So a final thing that I wanted to cover in this session is to consider our organisation's product portfolio. So actually, are they missing a trick? Are they have they got everything they need to deliver long-term profits through innovating and also having long-standing success in certain markets? So we've got BCG, which is the Boston Consulting Group, created a matrix. So it's quite some time ago in the 1970s, but it's quite a useful way of exploring the markets in which they're operating in and the strategies around them. So we've got a cash cow. So a cash cow is in the element where it's performed really well. We've got a high market share, but the market slowed down. So this could be for Coca-Cola, for their original products in that category. So actually, big market share in quite a stagnant market. However, it brings massive profits to the organisation. So they continue to do advertising to be top of mind, but they don't need to do masses of it because people know and trust the product. So they're a really good staple for an organisation's portfolio, highly profitable, and we're not having to invest a huge amount in them. Dogs at the other end, maybe at some point were cash cows, but the market shrunk. It shrunk to a point that actually, is it worth operating in there anymore? So companies need to be really careful in terms of what they do with their dogs. Do they let them go? Do they wind down that product range? Do they continue it for a short period of time, or do they sell it off? But basically, it's costing them money to run it. So these are the ones where we've got a high exit cost when we talked about in the sort of when we were categorising Porter's five forces. So we're looking here at markets that aren't very attractive to operate in. Question marks are an interesting one because we don't know where they're going to go. They're in a market with a high potential, so this is very exciting. However, they've only got a low market share. So is it going to go up or is it going to just stagnate? And the only way we can tell is by investing, and that makes it risky because we don't know what to do. Okay, so we have to treat those with caution, and it will depend on the resource we've got available. Stars are fantastic because stars are in a growing marketplace, but we've tended to spend a lot of money on them to get them there. We've innovated, we've promoted them heavily, and ultimately they'll probably sink down and be our cash cows. So we always want some stars in our product portfolio. So here we've got, I think it's a really effective way, the Boston Consulting Group, of just checking where we're at. So we've got our cash cows, they supply the funds to invest in the business, to support our question marks and to continue to invest in our stars. Our stars are exciting, but we know at some point they're likely to fade into cash cows because it's unlikely for a market to continue to grow and grow all the time. Our question marks, we need to work out what to do with. Are we going to invest resource into them, or are we going to actually, have we not got the resource? And which question marks are we going to go for? Because we might have a number of them. And our dogs, we need to eliminate, but we need a plan, a strategy to do so. So I'm really conscious today's session covered a lot of material. We started off with global markets. So we started off by looking at what's going on in terms of how we're going to manage over a number of geographies. We then considered a couple of tools, a pestle and the and Porter's five forces, to look at the marketplace we're operating in. We then looked at how do we create customer value. We looked in particular whether it's through product differentiation, customer intimacy, or whether it's really through economies of scale, so we get our products fast and they've got the mechanisms to serve us well. We then looked at branding as a tool to deliver on customer value through perceptions, through creating a reputation. And then we finally considered looking at the organisation in terms of where their different offerings sit. All of these things I would encourage need to be supported by really high quality data to truly understand the best strategic decisions we've got available. So thank you very much for listening. We've got a number of references as well, and I hope you'll join me in today's seminar.